Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for the launch of the book Antarcticness. My name is Ilan Kelman, and I had the pleasure of editing this volume with all our wonderful authors. We are not here at the moment to celebrate. Instead, we are offering hope. In times of war, we can and should think of peace. And whatever has been happening today and will happen over the coming days, we still very much see Antarctica as a continent of peace, for which decades has shown what humanity can do when we come together and support each other. That message will come through from the presenters that you hear tonight. I will put in the chat the link to the book, which is entirely free to download as a PDF, and I will also add links to blogs covering what the book is about. So now, over to our guest speakers, over to our authors, starting with Jelena.
Thank you very much, Ilan, and thank you for your words. It is my pleasure to speak today at the launch of the book that so excellently reflects the community of people working on, in, and about Antarctica, the book that reflects the connections that many of us have, whether we have been in real life in Antarctica, only imagine it, and also the responsibilities that we have toward Antarctica. And it is exactly what I would like to talk about today and discuss the Rights of Antarctica initiative, advocated by a group of academics, lawyers, and civil society members, the group that I have been part of since early summer of 2021. Quoting from the foreword of the book, "We are all part of nature, and Antarctica is a part of all of us. We can all be a voice of protection for Antarctica," end of the quote. The authors of the foreword, Cristiana Figueres and Misumbi Kanayora, invite the reader to respect and to celebrate the natural world that we are part of. The goal of the Rights of Antarctica initiative is to put these words in action, to draft a document, a declaration that would establish the rights of Antarctica and correlating duties on our behalf, our duties toward Antarctica. The aim is to have open to all process and have a democratically created declaration to be launched later this year on April 22nd on Earth Day for signatures by states and NGOs. As a group advocating for this initiative, we believe that the current legal systems don't match the physical reality, and that recognizing the rights of Antarctica is essential to rocking the existing status quo, which is very much based on colonial way of thinking of exploitation and appropriation of resources. And it is hard to challenge the status quo unless there is an alternative vision. So this is what we're trying to do as the group behind the initiative. The aim is to create such an alternative vision, to move away from the colonial way of thinking and toward the way of thinking that views Antarctica as a living community that we ought to respect and protect, and to be its voice when needed. As Gabriela Roldan and Hannah Nielsen write in chapter 3 of the book, imagination about what Antarctica was predated any exploration. So the rights of nature, the rights of Antarctica, which is very much actually aligned with the rights of nature, invites you to join in imagining what it could be like if rights of Antarctica were recognized. And perhaps then the next era in Antarctica will not be about exploring heroism or conquest, but the era of humility and respect and celebration of Antarctica. And now let me share the screen and I will be going over the actual declaration. Just a second. All right. Okay. Just to give credit to Cormac Cullinan, who actually made this PowerPoint. He is an international lawyer from South Africa. He's part of the group behind the initiative. And we use this PowerPoint at Global Greens Congress, which is a congress that brings Green parties together. And this was about a couple of weeks ago. So I will not be going over each article, but just to give an overview of the declaration. It consists of 13 articles, and it starts with the preamble. Article 1 defines how we understand Antarctica. Article 2 defines legal status of Antarctica. Article 3 elaborates on Article 2 and discusses inherent rights and freedoms of Antarctica and its members, because we view it as a community of living beings. Article 4, just like Antarctic Treaty, discusses territorial claims. Unlike Antarctic Treaty, it plainly rejects them. Article 5 through 7 covers human relationships, including duties and also activities that will be permitted in Antarctica and also outside of Antarctica. Article 8 and 9 are about decision-making as well as representation of Antarctica in human decision-making fora. Article 10 covers measures to implement declaration. Article 11 is about dispute resolution, and Article 12 covers relationship between declaration and existing treaties, such as Antarctic Treaty and other relevant international regimes. The preamble starts, "We, the peoples of Earth, celebrating the beautiful wild continent we know as Antarctica." The preamble accepts Antarctica as the community that plays the vital role in maintaining the ecological stability and health of the whole Earth community. It also states that we are conscious of the grave threats that some human activities pose to the health of this community. Preamble continues and states that we accept our collective responsibilities to safeguard Antarctica from harm by humans. And it also states that Antarctica should be free from claims of ownership and harmful human influences. Preamble also calls upon all peoples, organizations, and institutions to take responsibility to promote universal and effective recognition, to observe the rights and duties recognized in this declaration. Now, going into actual articles. So Article 1 defines what Antarctic community encompasses, and that it is the holder of rights, meaning it is a subject, not an object. Article 2 defines legal status of Antarctica. It defines Antarctica as self-regulating and autonomous, as being beyond national jurisdiction and not subject to state sovereignty. It also defines Antarctica as a legal subject with a capacity to hold rights and exercise freedoms, and also is being composed of members, which are also in themselves legal subjects with rights and freedoms. Elaborating on that, Article 3 covers this inherent rights and freedoms of Antarctica and its members, and also that these rights must be respected by humans. Article 5 is about human relationships with Antarctica. It lays down principles that must be observed by humans and states when interacting with Antarctica and Antarctic community members. For example, these principles are regarding respecting other beings, relationality and reciprocity, and also when we make decisions, that the decision should be made on the basis what is in the interest of the long-term integrity and health of Antarctica. Then Article 7 covers permissible human activities. So it defines what human activities would be permissible within the Antarctic area, but also it considers the activities that happen outside of Antarctica, because of course we know what happens in Antarctica largely is the result of what happens outside of Antarctica. Article 8, moving into decision-making in relation to Antarctica. Article 8 would require establishment of institutional arrangements to ensure that declaration is implemented properly, and that different interests and perspectives, such as indigenous people perspectives, are taken into account and represented in decision-making structures. Then Article 9 looks at how Antarctica and its members how it could be and how they should be represented, and how they can participate in human decision-making that may affect them. And this includes, for example, participation in Antarctic Treaty System and United Nations, as well as legal proceedings before national and international courts. And lastly, Article 10 lays down the measures that humans and states should observe to give effect to declaration, and this may include amending existing treaties such as Antarctic Treaty to accord with this declaration, and also making provision for Antarctica to be represented in national courts, as well as promoting actions that inform people about the Antarctic community. And if you have any more questions, I invite you to check out our website. It's antarcticarights.org, and you can email us at info@antarcticarights.org. We welcome feedback on the declaration, and very much like in the end, I believe it's in the end of the foreword of the book, the authors ask, will you be the voice for Antarctica? And this is what we invite you to join us and be the voice for Antarctica. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and bringing these ideas to us. Our next guest, Kate Stockings, is unfortunately ill today, but she very kindly recorded a video so we can learn from her.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to join this book launch today. My name's Kate Stockings and I teach geography full-time and in a comprehensive school in London. I've had a keen interest in Arcticness and this book since the beginning of the idea, and I'm really pleased to be speaking as my small contribution to this book and the book launch. So as I said, I've been teaching 11 to 18-year-olds geography in London for the last 7 years. And as you can see from the images on the screen, I teach about Antarctica. But what do I teach, when and why? That's what I want to speak to you about today, and hopefully you'll find it useful and perhaps thought-provoking about what's going on in our classrooms in the UK with regards to the continent. My Twitter and my email are on the screen, so please do get in touch after if you have any questions, any ideas, or any ways that we could take this further. So, as I said, I've always taught Antarctica. For those of you who don't know the English system, we have a lot of freedom with what we can teach our 11 to 14-year-olds. We follow the national curriculum of the UK, which does lay out some detail of what we can teach, but it's not overly prescriptive. It doesn't state, for example, that all schools must teach about Antarctica before students reach 14. And yet many do. So why do so many geography teachers choose to teach about this continent? Why is the teaching of Antarctica of value? Should we teach this continent to our students? And if we choose to, how are we ensuring that it is taught in the very, very best way possible? These are some of the questions I'd like to pose in the next 9 minutes or so. So in England, our government guidance makes it clear that by the time a student reaches 14, the end of Key Stage 3 on the right-hand side of this screen, this is what they should be able to do. Obviously, I've only included the components that are relevant to Antarctica today, but you can see that by the time a student is 14, the government says that they must be able to clearly locate Antarctica, including the Antarctic Circle. They should be able to identify Antarctica as a polar desert, including what characteristics result in it being a polar desert. And they must understand the key geographical processes linked to glaciation. So all students must be familiar with the continent, and yet many schools do much, much more than this. Why? Well, when we look at the broader aims of the English national curriculum, we can see these two statements are included. And if we're going to develop our contextual knowledge of the location of globally significant places, terrestrial and marine, and if we're going to understand the processes that give rise to key physical and human geographical features of the world and how these are interdependent, can we do it without teaching Antarctica? Now, if you're here and interested in the continent and attending this book launch, you're probably going to argue that no, we have to teach about Antarctica in order to fully fulfill those aims that are in the English national curriculum. I'd agree. I think Antarctica is a fantastic lens through which to study these two aims. So why are we teaching about Antarctica? How are we using it in our geography lessons to achieve those aims? Well, this is what I think most people do currently. I think most people choose to study Antarctica as a place. They use it as a way to teach our students that places matter, that places are unique, and that they're uniquely influenced by the processes and the human interactions that happen in that place. I think many of us also teach Antarctica as a way of which to show how interconnected the world is, as a way of which to show that the world is infinitely connected, and that our local actions are interdependent on a global scale. If we're thinking about the Anthropocene and the way that we're teaching about the interconnections of our planet, perhaps it is non-debatable that Antarctica should be taught. But are these 3 bullet points, is this rich and powerful geographical knowledge? Is this really taking our students beyond what they could likely get from a David Attenborough documentary? Is this really taking our students beyond the familiar and beyond their everyday lessons? I'd argue that perhaps there's not. Perhaps there's not that much here that really is stretching our students to engage with Antarctica. So what is that powerful geographical knowledge? What knowledge do we as a geography teacher community want our students to know about Antarctica that they couldn't get without a subject specialist teaching them? I'd argue that this is a discussion and a reflection that our community of geography teachers needs to have. Now, in the book, they talk about the Antarctic flag competition of the UK Polar Network, and I love this competition. I take part in it every year, have taken part in it for several years, and the students absolutely adore it. And yet each year it reminds me of the single lens through which our students can see the continent. And you can see here one theme is reoccurring, and that is that of penguins. Is there a danger in our teaching that we can sometimes reduce this rich continent and this rich geographical area to the home of penguins? I think perhaps sometimes there is. I think I've been guilty of it in the past, of reducing Antarctica to a home of penguins. So how do we avoid that? That's the question and the discussion I want to spark today. How do we decide what the powerful knowledge about Antarctica might be? And how can we get the academic community to help us, to help the geography teacher community in that discussion? How can we ensure that teachers who are incredibly busy people, but they are incredibly committed, how can we ensure they've got the resources that they need to keep their subject knowledge absolutely up to date? So is this the powerful knowledge that we want people to be teaching about Antarctica? Do we want our teachers to be focusing on the physical processes of the continent as a contested area, as a continent, as a home to resources and a home to possible future uses that are really, really contested? And do we want to perhaps use Antarctica as a showcase for multilateralism, thinking about the Antarctic Treaty and thinking about that idea of global commons? They're just three ideas I had as to how we could tweak our teaching of the continent to ensure that we're going so much further beyond that home of penguins. But whatever we decide, whatever the geography and the wider community decide, I think we need to work together and we need to help in having that conversation. We need to learn from the experts. We, the geography teacher, we need to learn from the people who study the continent at the highest level to ensure that we've got the knowledge to teach it. And I think that's where I know that's where this book is going to help us. This book is going to be able to go out to geography teachers and ignite that conversation. What are the various different ways that we can think about this continent, and what is the knowledge that we should be teaching? Thank you for listening, and I hope I've given you plenty to think about there. As I say, I teach Antarctica. I'm going to continue to teach Antarctica to our 11 to 14-year-olds, but how can we make it the absolute best teaching possible? Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much to the two guests for interpreting Antarcticness. We now move to our authors. So Wilson, please say a few words.
Yes, thank you very much. I really feel honorable to write this piece of master class writing about Antarcticness. For me, Antarctica, or for everybody, have a unique value for everybody. But how to build up the Antarcticness, because everybody appreciate about the wilderness of this frontier of the last continent. And that's why I'm using my privilege of 10 years experience working in Antarctica to show that how wilderness to give us wisdom that we are missing in this century. Because in my perspective, Antarctica value contain three elements. One is about international space, because when we work in Antarctica, we don't talk about economic, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about any nationality. We work together. And then second thing is about the exploration spirit, because as a humankind, we need to keep our curiosity to explore the physical world. And Antarctica sort of have ignited their curiosity to see our physical world. And last things, and I really want to mention, is because of the concept of wilderness. Because according to my study about Antarctica cruising ship tourism, about the motivation and interpretation of Antarctica, actually Western people with Asian people have different kind of interpretation of the wilderness concept. And this is very important to understand why wilderness concept is very is unique in Antarctica, and actually it's the way why we conserve Antarctica Treaty as well. So better understanding different kind of nationality and culture to interpret Antarctica and wilderness concept is very important to sustain our Antarctica Treaty as well as the environmental issue of Antarctica. And that's why I would like you, everybody, enjoy these readings because about 98% of the tourists to go Antarctica is only visiting Antarctica Peninsula, and only about 200 visitors will go to South Pole, Mount Vinson, even ski to South Pole or see the emperor penguin. And I feel honored to share my valuable experience in the internal of Antarctica. We call it deep field, and you can learn about how the white emptiness continent to give us the wisdom that we are missing in nowadays. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wilson. A delight to have these insights and really appreciate you presenting them. Jean, please, you are next.
So I'd just like to talk to you about my contribution, obviously, to Antarcticness. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the day on which we are doing this event and what has happened today. So it is the 24th of February, 2022, as we know. Today, war was declared on the Ukraine. I remember coming into the Vernadsky base on Galindas Island at the on the Antarctic Peninsula when I was writer-in-residence with the British Antarctic Survey. We provisioned in a number of bases and we stopped in to Vernadsky for a friendly visit. I would like to commend exactly what and echo what Wilson has just said, that the Antarctic was, in my experience, and is still a zone of mutual encounter, of science and cooperation, of humanism, and a place where politics and territorial disputes that were happening in the rest of the world could be set aside. So I feel extremely baleful today, but I'm going to go ahead with this. I want to talk to you about language, time, and the Anthropocene. So I'm going to offer some reflections. But first of all, I'll say who I am. I'm a writer. I was writer-in-residence with the British Antarctic Survey. I then spent about 6 years living and working and researching further in the Antarctic region, not the Antarctic continent itself, and also the Arctic. So it was an initial period that sparked off a lifelong passion and obsession. However, I'm not actually a poet, or I am a poet in that I write poetry, but I don't define myself as a poet. So one of the questions is, why did I start writing poetry in the Antarctic? I did write poetry before that, but it was really interesting how it was the first mode that I went into, and I'd just like to reflect upon that. The poem that's in the book, which some of you may not have read and indeed may not read, but I'll just tell you a little bit about the way it was written. It was written on a ship. And there are two ways to go to Antarctica. One is on a ship, but the other is to fly in. The benefit of going on a ship is that it's a long transition. In fact, our journey was supposed to be quite short. It was supposed to be sort of lightning speed, 5-6 days, stop in Vernadsky, as I mentioned, and then go to the British base, Rothera, on the Antarctic Peninsula. But it took us, in the end, almost 3 weeks because of ice conditions. So, you know, the fact is, writing on a ship is a fantastic place to write. The ship is itself in motion. It is an experience. It is a journey. It is an extraterrestrial machine. It is a platform of scientific capability. And it's constantly moving, and constantly there is this noise, which is a bit like the mother's heartbeat in the womb. There is the thrum of the engines. It's very, very reassuring, even no matter how outlandish and sometimes actually quite frightening the world gets outside, depending upon the weather is. So there's something womb-like and also capsule-like, time capsule-like about a ship. It's a fantastic place to write also because you don't need to worry about cooking. All your meals are done for you. So you just show up and you write. And I wrote a lot on the ship. But what I'd like to talk about, so that's sort of setting the scene. is the relationship, as I said, between time, language, and the Antarctic as it stands now in a context of the Anthropocene. So really, this is kind of meta-analysis of some of the things that the poem deals with. So the Antarctic was imagined long before it was encountered by humanity. I think most of us know that. But this fact sets up a kind of frisson of unreality in the Antarctic. It is unreal and real and hyper real, I suppose we could say, at the same time. I think also the writer is in a curious position there, because you know you are bearing witness to something that most people will never see in their lifetimes, a place they will never be, a concept, in fact, they may never engage with. So you are something of an envoy set to report back. So it's a privileged position, a charged position, if you will. But even while we are in Antarctica, we are shuttling between a real place and a place which bears the weight of the imaginative effort that was brought to weigh on the Antarctic by the Greeks, by European culture before it was ever fully physically encountered. And literary writing, of course, in general, mediates between these two realms, the real and the imagined. That is one of the things it does. Any writing, in my experience, relies upon perceptual evidence. So what you feel, what you taste, what you see. Writing is very concrete in that respect. You need to be able to call upon concrete phenomena to evoke reality, mimesis, in other words. But in Antarctica, perception becomes very unreliable for a number of reasons to do with the climatic conditions. And in fact, what I find is that in Antarctica, writers and artists tend to draw upon the symbolic and the abstract rather than the literal, for reasons which I'm just going to investigate now. So I'll share a paradox with you, a couple of paradoxes actually. The books lined up on my shelf are still the ones I took to Antarctica, and they're quite convincing for an Antarctic writer. South, The Worst Journey in the World, biography of Robert Falcon Scott, so all the classics, and I carted those classics to Antarctica from London, in fact. But interestingly, as much as I devoured those stories of whoosh and killer whales and near death and cold, I found that when I had them with me in the Antarctic, I couldn't read them. I did try a number of times, but if I did read them, I felt a kind of sharp pain at the bottom of my lungs, a sort of early warning system for me anyway of anxiety. And after a couple of pages, I would have to put them down. Why is that, we might wonder. Anyway, I'll speculate in a moment. I had an even more serious problem in that I found it very difficult to write there. I wrote this poem, which is in the book, or I wrote an earlier version of it, a kind of holographic version of it. But it was certainly very inconvenient not to be able to write, because I'd been sent there at great cost by the British taxpayer, and it was what I was supposed to do. My mission was to write a novel, which I did eventually write. But I couldn't face the page. I think partly the problem was I was failing for the first time in my life as a writer to describe the most basic things that I saw and that I experienced. The sky, the sea, the mountains, what we did. And that being there didn't seem to help me interpret being there. And that was the first time in my life that happened. So it was a kind of failure to render everything, but certainly the Antarctic. And not because I lacked the vocabulary. In fact, I had lots of tomes with me. I learned 74 mariners' terms for ice. I learned a kind of Antarctic cant, an Antarctic lexicon, which is quite unique to the Antarctic, which is a mishmash of a number of different languages and military terms. But the problem was more diffuse, and years had to pass before I could diagnose it. And ultimately, I suppose, is that it was the encounter with the real, in that the books were largely an account of reality the Antarctic was itself an overwhelming reality, and I was supposed to be the imaginative mediator in the middle, and to put the books and myself as a body and the reality of the Antarctic in the same place, I couldn't actually find the space for interpretation. And so language, in some ways, became a white page to me, blank page, which I'd never faced before. I'd certainly never faced writer's block before. And I think I'm supposed to conclude, but I guess I wanted to note the congruence between the blank page of the writer struggling with the limits of language, as I did with the Antarctic, and the tabula rasa of the Antarctic itself, the landscape. So the white space of the Antarctic is very much like the white space of the blank page. So I'll finish there. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jean, for these wonderful insights, particularly how to write, how not to write, but how to bring the two together. TJ, please go ahead.
Yep. Great. So today I'll just briefly talk to you about chapter 11 in Antarcticness, which is describing and advocating for an Antarctic Flags project that Sammy Buzzard and I helped lead back in the day when we were part of the UK Polar Network, which is the UK's national branch of the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists. The Antarctic Flags project is originally a collaboration between the UK Polar Network and Our Spaces, and a foundation for the good governance of international space, to promote Antarctica as a, not only as a unique and remote location, but also a location for shared governance, scientific cooperation, and an advocate for peaceful science and peaceful work in general. And so through these concepts, we asked students all over the world to send us their designs of what they would think an Antarctic flag would be, given that there is currently no such flag that represents the Antarctic continent. And so we asked them to draw upon these kind of ideals of peace, scientific cooperation, and scientific governance to design their own flag. And when they send these to us, we then pair these flags with researchers that are heading down south, so that these flags may travel to and from the Antarctic continent, and having records, and then sending these records back to the students to kind of allow them to have a connection beyond what they learn in the classroom. And so you can read more about this project and the history of the project, the ideals that we try and develop, and all the benefits that the project can deliver. But for those who know any educators or are an educator yourself, we would love for you to participate in next year's campaign. And so these are the details that you can contact the UK Polar Network or read more about the project, and please share the project with anyone you think may be interested in participating. And so that concludes my brief presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for providing that and the opportunity to get involved. Yufei, if you would please say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Elan, for coordinating these events and all your efforts in producing these books with all the contributors. So I appreciate this opportunity to participate in this book project, and I'm representing chapter 14 with my co-author Daniela Cahiao. She couldn't join us. I think she's exploring Africa right now. So I think among all of us, many of us, I'm one of the least, a person with the least Antarctic experience, direct experience. But I think my first and so far the only introduction to Antarctica was very transformative. And so that made me really change what I kind of my research and agenda. What's the priority should be for the rest of my research and my work. So I really appreciate this opportunity. Really feel fortunate that I had that opportunity to visit Antarctica, and just a little bit the tiny tip of the peninsula right before the pandemic. So I also enjoyed this writing experience, and it's very different than preparing a journal article. So that was quite challenging for me and Daniela to integrate our personal experience with academic literature, particularly tourism literature, and to explore how our experience, how tourist experience means, and what research has been done on that, and how that is related or resonated in our own personal encounters with Antarctica. And I think also our book chapter, we did our best. I think there's still room for improvement, I'm sure, but we try our best to integrate and explain and articulate the coexistence and interactions of all these contrasting elements of Antarcticness, about things that are really permanent and unchanged, things are dynamics in every second or every minute, and the slowness, the timelessness, the dynamics, uncertainties, and permanence, and all these elements that constitute the more complete Antarcticness experience. So we hope that this chapter can inspire or at least stimulate some thinking and imagination for the readers who might be potential Antarctic tourists, or they may have been Antarctic tourists already, to think about what Antarcticness means and what a true authentic Antarctic experience means, and how we can provide and do our best to protect that the opportunity for the future generations to experience that Antarcticness. So thank you. I think that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and appreciated, and particularly appreciated your chapter. Very welcome and very needed. Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everybody. Hola a todos. It is my absolute pleasure to be speaking today to you from Ōtautahi Christchurch in Aotearoa, New Zealand, my adopted homeland. And I pay my respects to all the Indigenous groups that call home the land that today I will refer to as the Antarctic Gateway cities, which has been my focus for my research and my passion. I've been very lucky to live and visit and work in all 5 known Antarctic gateways. Just like in all Antarctic cities that we speak about in this chapter, in Christchurch and in all of New Zealand, really, we're on the edge of the Southern Ocean. We experience the Antarctic blast in the weather, and we're aware of our neighbor in the south. The Southern Ocean becomes this conveyor belt that connects us to Antarctica, and also this foreign environment that it will stop us from some of us at least, from even reaching Antarctica. Over the summer months at the Antarctic gateways, we see distinctive ships calling at the port. We see people wearing different colorful uniforms and speaking foreign languages. We host them while they're traveling to Antarctica, whether it's for science, support, or tourism. And so if you're a mad keen person on Antarctica like I am, being at an Antarctic gateway is the right place to be. You're surrounded by all these really interesting symbols and signs, and motivated to think about Antarctica. As academics and authors with Hannah, Antarctica matters to us too. It's a place we have worked in, we have studied and continue to study, and we live in proximity too, and that is by choice. And we are conscious that we're very lucky of having that choice. Antarctica fascinates us. It calls, it really makes our hearts sing. And although peace and science are at the heart of the governance of Antarctica, it's not just a place for scientists. It's a place for stories, for global connections that matter and should matter to all of us. And I acknowledge Jean's message today in times of despair like we're living now. Antarctica could be that place of hope for all of us. In our chapter, Antarcticness at the End of the World, chapter 3, Hannah Nielsen and I write about these Antarctic cities. They may seem remote from a northern perspective, but these cities are connected with Antarctica through that, if you want to call it, southern rim. There are many examples in these cities on how their communities represent and imagine Antarctica and the Antarctic connection. We look at statues, signs, maps, festivals, murals. Some of these represent annual pilgrimages to pay respects to Antarcticans, past and present. Other places are contested and even in a way rejected by members of the community because they symbolize troubling times and the history of the nation. We argue that Antarctica matters to the communities of the gateways. Their Antarcticness is multi-layer connections constructed and reconstructed over time in the fabric of their social identity. Antarctica is weaved in their stories, in the politics and economic developments, and even, if you will, the infrastructure that these cities offer to the world that is not precisely thinking about Antarctica. We bring another perspective to how people connect with Antarctica from outside the legal boundaries that have been set for Antarctica, in that we argue we should be looking a little bit further out of those legal boundaries. We hope it inspires you to think of your connectedness with Antarctica wherever you are in the world, and not just when you are in the polar south. So we close our contribution in this chapter by suggesting that Antarcticness need not to be an exclusionary concept reserved only for those lucky enough to have had the privilege of traveling to the southern continent. We feel very lucky. We have had many of these encounters in Antarctica, but we understand that rather, once a connection with a place has been established, whether this is via any of the festivals and books and weather patterns and symbols that we have identified in this chapter, or historical narratives, it is possible to sit anywhere in the world and engage with Antarctica in a meaningful way, like we are doing right now. So congratulations on the launch of the book. It is a beautiful book. It is very exciting to see all the many different perspectives. We feel very lucky and humbled to have offered our contribution. And thank you, Ilan, for doing all this work and giving us the opportunity to focus on Antarcticness from the ends of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now to close our author contributions, over to Homeward Bound.
Thank you, Ellen. And thank you, everyone else. It's so interesting to hear all the other chapters and from the different authors and just how diverse this book is. And I think Hannah would agree with me that as we listen to everybody else, it's just amazing to hear so many similarities that I think are echoed in our chapter. Where we find wisdom from Antarctica, how difficult it can be to describe or put into words, but how much responsibility we have to, try and have that ripple effect of having had the privilege to go there, to share that with other people when we come back. So Hannah and I are here today to represent the Homeward Bound community and the 14 women who co-authored chapter 10, which is Togetherness for Antarcticness. And I think we chose that title because we really felt that togetherness and Antarcticness were pretty much the same thing to us. But we also represent sort of hundreds of other women that have now taken part in the Homeward Bound experience, which we'll describe a little bit more, as we decided the best way to share our chapter was to read out some sections from the chapter, which I'll share with you now. along with some of the beautiful images that we included in the chapter. So I'll start with the opening paragraphs. Homeward Bound is a groundbreaking global leadership training program for women in STEM, meaning science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine. And we have a close bond to Antarctica. Homeward Bound aims to heighten the influence and impact of women in making decisions that shape our planet by training 1,000 women over 10 years. And this aim has recently been updated to training 10,000 women by 2036, which would be quite incredible. As of December 2020, which shows you how long we've been working on these chapters for, the Homeward Bound network comprised of 410 women representing 45 nationalities and is now vastly grown and vastly more diverse. We are united in the knowledge that we are stronger together, we are able and willing to lead, and we are taking action with impact. Each woman has her own story, as you all also do. At the time of writing, 4 cohorts of women from the Homeward Bound programme had travelled to Antarctica, and the 5th cohort was waiting to find out if this would become a reality for them. The Homeward Bound programme has just introduced its 7th cohort this year, which is really exciting, and you could be part of the next one. The programme includes a year of remote learning, followed by a 3-week Antarctic expedition. But what we discovered and our relationships to Antarctica is entirely individual. In this chapter, we couldn't possibly hope to represent all of our different experiences, but we did hope to capture the essence of our story through a blend of individual and shared memories and a collective feeling of Antarcticness. We invite you to join us on our leadership journey and our expedition to Antarctica through the stages of embarking, crossing, exploring, returning, emerging, and finally imagining. I'll pass over to Hannah to read you a couple more extracts.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to read 2 short extracts. So the first one is from Crossing. We are now in the moment after the beginning. There's no turning back. The moment when the journey becomes real. The moment after the anticipation, when the real challenges of the journey start to reveal themselves. Together we support each other through any discomfort, knowing that challenge can reap rewards. We muster the courage to step forward into a world unknown to many of us, to forge a different path. We venture into this unknown to create a better world, a better way of being and thinking, a better way of leading, together. And now an extract from Returning. This transition period back to South America allows us to look back at the imposter syndrome we all shared before becoming Antarcticians. So many of us were convinced that Homeward Bound would not select us, that Antarctica would remain a dream. Yet here we are, braving the waves coming back from Antarctica. We are now ambassadors set to protect this remote, fragile, and immense beauty. And we will stay stubbornly optimistic to protect it, because we are stronger together. Land is now in sight, and we are struck by the fact that icebergs are already so far away. Only yesterday I could close my eyes and reopen them to the peaceful Antarctic beauty. Yet now they are a memory or a photograph. When I close my eyes, I can see my home and my family. Okay, I'll hand it back over to Madeline.
Yes, so a final section from the emerging part of the chapter. It is very comforting to know that whenever we step up and we fall or fail, there is a group of women behind us to support us and to help us back up. Stronger together and stubborn optimism have become life mottos for everyone involved in the Homeward Bound programme. We as women are stepping up for our values and beliefs. The worldwide health and environmental crises we are currently facing require compassionate, authentic, and strong leadership. Together, we can and will build a more sustainable and inclusive future. And what better way than to do this together and through the bonds we have forged with and within Antarctica. So I'd like to say thank you again from the 14 women who co-wrote this chapter. It was really enjoyable to try and write this together. Got all of their names there. It was really exciting to try and bring together all of these different memories and experiences and look at the similarities and differences that everyone had. And we represent 5 cohorts of women across 4 or 5 years. I'd also like to make sure that we say thank you to Christiana and Musimbi, who are the 2 people who co-authored the foreword to the Antarcticness book, and they were also part of the Homeward Bound community. And if you've never come across them before, I urge you to go and look them up to read their chapter. And if you're interested in Homeward Bound, I'll put the link in the chat, and it has the wonderful resource that there is a list of all the women who have ever been involved. So you can search through, look at their origins from all over the world and all the different STEM communities that they're part of. So thank you very much from us.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers, thank you to our authors, and a special thanks to our audience for coming out and joining the Antarcticness journey. We hope, and that word has been used a lot this evening, we very much hope that you've been inspired, that you're getting imaginations from it, and that we can bring some hope in these times of troubles, in these times of difficulties. Again, the links to the free download of the book and some blogs are in the chat. Just search for Antarcticness in order to hopefully lead to your inspiration and your imaginaries. Ultimately, Antarcticness affects us all. Antarctica represents us all. Antarctica is for us all. So thank you to everyone for Antarcticness.